Okay.
I'm happy to welcome Joe Haslam, professor at IE Business School and executive director of the Owners Scaleup Program at IE University, to our podcast. Joe, welcome.
Thank you very much, Sammy. It's always great to reconnect with my former students. I have great memories of meeting you when you were a student, and it's good that technology allows us to reconnect.
Okay, yeah, Joe, where are you living?
Well, I'm in Madrid. I mean, I did most of my traveling before I came to Madrid. I've lived in 8 countries before then, but I guess you reach a stage in your life when you get married and settle down. So even though I grew up in Ireland and lived in lots of countries, the States, the UK, France, Netherlands, places like that, I've been settled now in Madrid for the last 15 years.
Nice. And what do you love to do outside of work?
Well, again, I used to do God, I've become such a boring middle-aged guy, especially when I'm talking to a triathlete or something. I'm suddenly going to make myself really boring.
I would have thought rugby or something, or drinking a lot of whiskey or so. I don't know. Something Irish people would do.
Yes, indeed. All of those things. But no, I used to do a lot of mountaineering before I got married. I did like 4 of the 7 summits and things like that. So that might give me some credibility with your audience. But I guess once you get married and have kids, it's no time to be discussing helicopter rescues and trying how to bribe the Indonesian army and these kind of things. So, I guess, yeah, I mean, you can't, when you get into middle age, you can't really do any active sports anymore, so I still like to run and I still like to swim. Yeah, I can't play rugby anymore. I don't think that would, I think my body would allow that.
Can you give us a short summary of your entrepreneurial past?
Well, I guess I've co-founded 6 companies. I mean, you never say founded, and they go back really, I guess, in the .com period. That was kind of when I really got active. But I have a kind of a profile of the typical guy in the schoolyard who was sort of selling whatever you wanted to buy, so I've always been kind of like that. I got into trouble in school for having a food delivery business. Who would ever have thought that could ever work? And then after that, I guess through once the .com thing hit, I mean, I started like a lot of people. I went to London and I worked as a consultant there, management consultant there. And that was a very interesting time because of the .com thing was really taking off and we had like access and visibility. So I came back to Dublin. So I've started companies, a company called Marrakesh, co-founded it. 6 of us left consulting to start, and we raised $70 million and scaled to 250 people. So that's given me a lot of interest, I guess, in 2 sectors, which we're going to talk about a lot. One is B2B, because it was e-procurement software. So it was all about B2B, like there was no real B2C. So, we had a very good understanding of how, I guess, the enterprise, I mean, I talk to people now about how the enterprise software game works and they're like, literally can't believe, it was ever like that. It's become much more sophisticated. And then since I've come to Spain, we've started business in tourism, and I did an initial coin offering in cryptocurrency. And I could see myself, before I depart this earth, setting up another 6 companies. I mean, once you're kind of have that type of personality, you never stop. You're always looking to kind of to see what you can do and get past existing limits. So I combine teaching in our university with also setting up companies.
That's really nice. And I understand what you're saying in the sense that somehow you look at the world a little bit differently once you have this entrepreneurial bug and you see all kinds of problems and potentially fitting solutions, and there's not enough time in the world to test everything out. But it's not, yeah. I mean, it's really hard then to go back to not seeing this anymore.
Yeah, and the big thing, Sammy, is as you would know, is that there are less people like this than there are more, so most people are not like this, the kind of people who sort of come across something and wonder why it's not better, and also have the belief that they can make it better. Most people are not like that. But the really difficult thing is that I struggle with a lot of people is that I always say it's a blessing to be like this, but unless you embrace it, you'll always be frustrated. So I know lots of people who have this, and I try to tell them that it's a wonderful thing to have. And there are a lot of people who don't have it, they wish they have it, but they're still sort of frustrated. They're afraid of risk. They worry about, letting down their family, lots of other things like that. But, absolutely, if the way, the way you work is always kind of, that you'll never be satisfied. I mean, people often ask, like, after you sell a company, why do you set up another one? And I say, because the challenge is more sane. Like, otherwise your mind just drifts off to really scary places, and you start thinking, your hand is going to fall off, or you just kind of like, so if you have a personality. And the other thing is that, of course, it's great fun. I mean, you get to meet some really interesting people. You get to hear about, go into interesting places, eat wonderful foods. You have a feeling. But I mean, I remember I was teaching last weekend, and teaching 7 hours in Spanish. But after you do it, you feel fantastic. Like, before I was doing it, I was thinking like, oh, I'd really rather watch Netflix. But you do
Don't
it,
tell
and
that
then
to your students.
but you always feel fantastic afterwards, and you feel then as if you deserve, whatever, so that's a kind of a mentality you find, and other entrepreneurs recognize it in other people. But
yeah, absolutely.
that you can't, like, relax. You feel as if you have to deserve your relaxation time. You can't go directly there.
Yeah. So what do you exactly do at IE Business School?
So I focus on scaling up, which is what happens after you start. So everyone's heard of kind of entrepreneurship and startups and innovation and those kinds of things. But what I think is far more interesting is what happens after the product market fit, which is to say that we call a lot of companies startups, even though what they really are scale ups. What's interesting about them is not that they've started, but that they've scaled. And I think so. I've almost, as best I can, I try not to use the word startup, and I talk about pre-scale up. So this idea that you're thinking from the beginning about what you need to do in order to scale. So I work with everyone. I work with 18-year-olds in the university. I work with the MIM people who are between university and MBA. I work with the MBA class themselves, and also with the executive group, because a lot of them, like, statistically 45 is the best age to start a company. It's the age that gives you the maximum opportunity of success, because you combine deep industry knowledge, but also perhaps a lot of kind of self-confidence about yourself. When you reach middle age, you stop worrying about what other people think of you, and those kind of things. So it's really funny that my kind of, the interest was just something we never expected in IE among the executive MBA, who you think are very much focused on working for big companies and climbing the ladder. Actually, are an awful lot of them are kind of have entrepreneurial ideas, and they're really kind of interested. They don't value a lot of skills they have. In other words, they think everyone has certain competencies in terms of judging people, in terms of communication, in terms of working in teams, in terms of managing projects. They kind of think everyone have those, and they're quite surprised when I tell them that that's not the case. And they're also can be very interested in kind of starting something for themselves. And when I tell them that that's completely normal, and not only is it normal, but it's actually their skills. I mean, everything they've done up to now is leading up to this. Some of them get they shout out with joy and things like that. It's a real kind of and I think all of us in life, we need these kind of trigger moments, somebody who needs to sort of say to you that, like, it's okay, because a lot of people, depending on their influences, think that 45 is too late. So when somebody tells them that it isn't, that can be a real trigger.
Yeah, I mean, just reminds me of, wasn't it one of, like, you always have to say who was the original founder of McDonald's, but the guy who basically scaled it up in the end.
Ray
I
Kroc,
think, yeah, he wasn't he in his 40s?
No, he's 50s. Yeah,
50s
he was much
even.
older.
So it's never too late. Yeah, you can even start later. Or KFC, I think, also started pretty late. I don't know the exact age now, but it's a good message. Yeah, to say it's never too late. And I also feel, to be honest, that it's like my third company now that I started with, SAWOO, and many things are so much easier because you don't worry about those little decisions anymore. You have a way to go. And for example, if an employee doesn't fit, it's not the employee's fault, it's not your fault, it's just not a fit. And then you say, okay, I help you find something better. And that's it. And when I started my first company, you try to stick with it and grind it out. And it's so painful, and all these little things, you do much faster, more efficient, better. It's fun, I must say. I enjoy it a lot. Yeah. We want to talk a little bit about sales and marketing, and of course scaling. So this is like your main topic of companies. So and we had a little pre-talk and talked about the notion of hunting for new customers versus expanding with existing customers. What is your take on that, Joe?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, Sammy, you should never give away that we did preparation. It's always, this is totally spontaneous. But
no, it's fine. There will be enough spontaneity here. That's all good.
So yeah, no, it's just an issue that I see among. I mean, the place I live is very much, this magical phrase, product market fit, about have you hit product market fit, which is when you have exactly the right product for exactly the right market. You can add or subtract things to products, you can add and subtract the marketing, your target. So it's when the two things sort of come together. But one of the kind of things about the changing between startup to scale up is that perhaps, particularly if you're trying to raise money, it looks good on a PowerPoint to have lots of logos, like lots of customers. And I often say that, that you should, that leads you in the scale up phase to try and want to have lots of customers. And, I think it's far more important to go deeper and as deep as possible within a customer. I mean, I guess for the sort of they call this sticky technology in the enterprise software game, it's like trying to get Oracle out of your company, or trying to get like Ericsson, if in the case of 5G networks or something. But I think that it's really worth going as deep as possible into a company, and all the time putting your resources into going deep. I mean, you will obviously have to do some hunting for new companies, but don't sort of think that the job is done, and very often talk to the company you're dealing with about other parts of the company where your services might be of interest to. And the deeper you get into the company, I mean, first of all, it's harder to get you out, but second of all, you achieve real value. And if you achieve real value and you learn a lot more about your own product, so you have the dual function of earning money and also learning where your real value is. And you can take that then to other companies. And then, of course, there's the kind of the reference that you can use. But, they do call this like a beachhead in technology books, but I think that's, the difference between starting and scaling, a lot of it is counterintuitive, like fighting against the prevailing narrative. And one of those things, the prevailing narrative, is very much get lots of customers, that makes you look big. And I'm kind of thinking, that you should go against that and always think to try and go as deep as possible, which is the way of like really realizing the value of your product. And that's essential about product market fit. If you can really understand where the value is and solve a real problem for someone in a way that, literally, if you're going to your customers and say, if we disappeared in the morning, would you be upset? Like until you have that relationship, you haven't really created any value. And
That's
I
a
often
great
say to,
question. I just want to jump in
yeah,
here because there's a different take on Net Promoter Score, where you ask exactly that question. How disappointed would you be if you couldn't use our product anymore? Not disappointed, somewhat disappointed, or very disappointed. And that gives you a really good idea of you having product market fit. And for the ones who say somewhat disappointed, whatever those customers say they need to be very happy, that's what you should add to your product.
yeah.
So that was just why I wanted to jump in. It's really
No,
cool
no,
that you mentioned this.
Net Promoter Score is, I mean, it's one of those things like OKRs that you have some people that are really passionate about, and of course it has value. And like the question, how likely are you to recommend it? I mean, the simplicity of it is quite good, as opposed to definite models. But I like to, communication is about how you make people feel. And I often say to people like, imagine if your favorite restaurant closed, or, whatever pair of shoes you like, imagine if you couldn't find them, or I guess in your case, some wetsuit that you use that makes you go faster. Like if I was to take that away from you, I mean, like that level of engagement and connection, and I haven't, like, I'm a big fan of Twitter, for instance, and I use Twitter all the time. And like, if there was no Twitter, like my life would be less, So this is the kind of the thing that you always want to talk about. Is the product not just something that someone is happy to pay for, but does somebody feel genuinely like this is amazing? Like almost like the first time you Googled something and you saw not only that that it was finding things that Alta Vista hadn't found, or Excite or any of those things, that kind of feeling. And when you talk about it in those terms, it's actually it's a different way of thinking about the relationship between your product and your customers.
Yes, and I just had to think about the first time I heard about Google. It was when I was at university in early 2000s, and I think my professor told me about, there's a better way to find things now. It's faster and it's more precise. It's called Google. Try it out. And I thought, okay,
usually it's the students telling the professors, like there was an old joke, there's an old joke about, because it was a similar thing happened to me. And, there was an old joke about, people kind of using other things they found on Google, and they always like, the risk is the professor might know about Google too, and it's but it is very true that I remember the first time I used it, like there was just no question that I wasn't going to continue to use that. And we all have a lot of those kind of products in our life, whereby this just is exactly what we need, and there's just no question that you're not going to continue to use this going forward.
So now the question for a B2B company is if they buy into the notion of expanding within a customer. It has some implications and some things you have to maybe do differently to the old way of thinking, or to the way of thinking that you said about, I just need new logos. What do you see companies do differently that excel at keeping and expanding their existing clients?
Well, look, thinking of the long term is always, the issue. I remember there's a saying that, it's the only thing worth winning is winning in the long term, as opposed to, like, that's sort of where the game is. And, everything from, there's always like I joked about enterprise software, and there used to be this thing about heading for the hills, like get the PO and head for the hills. Like that was kind of the, you had all these sales guys that were, earning 400K, a lot of money, and they would just get the PO and you would sort of, never hear from them again kind of thing, because, the relationship was different. I mean, it's SaaS models and other models now are changing that relationship. But the obvious thing is just the single point of contact, and that person remains. You're not just kind of chop and changing, who your relationship manager is. That the feeling that goes. And I have lots of stories about like little things that people have told me, You know, I remember when we were working in Marrakesh, the company, like a guy kind of mentioned just about plastic bags, you know, that they were like one of our customers. They were, you know, we were helping them with indirect procurement. And then it just got casual mention of, you know, we were trying to solve like the mainstream problems, you know, and actually there was a problem you wouldn't think of. And it was just that you took the time to kind of sit down with the guy and listen. You know, I always say sales is not a, you know, I mean, everyone's heard this before, like sales is not about selling, it's about listening. And, you know, it's very true there that someone mentioned that, you know, that there's a, we don't know how many plastic bags we use a year. We don't know where they come from or anything about it, you know, and there must be savings, you know, it was a sort of a big supermarket. So like every penny counted. And so that was just a kind of a classic example of, you know, spending the time to sort of with the customer and not just kind of, and also like initiating conversations, you know, going back to McDonald's, heard the famous story about, you know, McDonald's have all these relationships with like Heinz ketchup and Coca-Cola, and they sort of take them for granted, you know, but you know, there's often a story told about, you know, that while Coca-Cola had, you know, were fulfilling the requirements and prioritizing, there was never really anything above that. You know, there was never any kind of like, you know, strategic meet, which is to sort of say, listen, what more can we do for you? You know, like apart from doing what we do well. And, you know, that is a sort of a thing that, I won't say it's going out of fashion, but you know, this idea of you know, that there is a relationship beyond, I mean, you do see it in finance with like counterparty risk and you know, those sort of issues. But I think that that's a sort of where that the owners or the CEOs or something like that, you know, really need to sort of say like, you know, what more can we do for you beyond? And then that will open up new areas. Maybe they're trying to go into something different. I mean, you know, I know probably only allowed one Steve Jobs story, right? And you know, there's a story of Steve Jobs and Corning Glass, you know, and you know, there was Corning were probably the only company that could make the glass for the iPhone, and you know, he took a lot of time. Corning took a lot of time. So Jobs called him up and said, you know, we need this, and then there was. You know, that wasn't possible, but he agreed to fly to Jobs and sort of explain to him the dynamics of the industry and to name sort of why it wasn't possible and when he thought it would be possible and who the players were and stuff like that. And that eventually then, you know, the story of both the iPhone and the iPod were that the idea was there for a long time, but the technology just wasn't right there. So when the thing eventually did come along, you know, the relationship was made. So whether you call that paying it forward, but you know, good companies, you know, should work with good companies. There's always a relationship can be found, and you know, that's a sort of you know, a lesson, which is to say that you go beyond just the fulfillment of the requirement, and you try and engage strategically. Whereby, you know, success is aligned. I'm becoming a total business school professor now, cliche by cliche, like, but success being aligned. So, you know, that kind of, but which is the classic, you know, that's what you want to have. That's how customers will feel that my success is your success, right? That's when relationships aren't good. It's because, you know, one of the parties is successful and the other isn't. So, you know, that's very much, if you find, particularly if it's a company on the rise, you know, that's doing interesting things and that, you know, is going to be around, and if those are your customers, you should definitely be engaging with that person at a level beyond fulfilling the basic requirement.
I like a lot what you're saying. On the one hand, it's always one level below company level. It's always people. Like people have a relationship with people, like the Steve Jobs story where the guy flew there and explained it in person and not just send a report and say, read this report, it's all in there. So on the one hand, having someone responsible for the relationship is what I took out of it and what I also buy in. The second super simple question that people should ask, but I don't think ask enough, is what more can we do for you? So that's a magic question. It's almost like the magic question that we have in our sales course. The first question is always in our course, what would you like to get out of this call?
Mm-hmm.
And it always opens up like magic, and you know what they're really interested in, what they need. And then it's like you said, it's listening mainly. It usually works really well. And the third one is more like, I call it positive karma, like paying it forward, however you want to name it. It's like even going beyond what you can do as a company or as an individual for someone, and helping them. So if it's something that maybe your company cannot help, but you know someone who can help, well, just invest these 5 minutes and connect those people. They will remember. And once you buy into this notion of, on the one hand, helping the company, and on the other hand, also building a relationship with an individual, a human being that has hobbies, interests, and so on and so forth, you get really creative. Like, for example, we looked for the personal interest of our clients, and found really cool little presents for Christmas, you know, and everybody was super happy. Like, the one guy is really into a French criminal book, and there was a cooking book about this criminal book, because it was really famous from the Bretagne. And so we found this book, and it's not expensive, it's just thinking about it, but super happy was this customer. And
the
they start to
relationship,
refer you.
Sammy, it's the the famous thing about, after this call, I'm going to go back to my email, and I'm going to open my email, and like there'll be 20 unread emails, and and it loves the question of which one do you open, and if it's a person that you like, that's always the question. It's often given it as a kind of a HR question, about hiring someone. Is this the kind of person who when they send you an email, you'll open straight away? Because there's some people's emails that you feel that the person treats sending an email to be like a privilege, that they don't send you half written, difficult, and those kinds of people are people you want to work with. And then other people, they just seem to like throw it over the fence, and so that's always so if you have the right kind of person, even if you should just keep the relationship with them, because over time, they are all like, we say they're on the side of the angels. They're trying to do interesting things, and that so even if you can't coincide, it's perhaps, I don't know why we want to get into big country or small country things, but I know in the case of Ireland, we have this small country thing that, when you ask somebody something, you never say no, sorry, I can't help you. You always kind of but ask, Sammy or something, there's always that sort of a thing that, look, we're a small country, so we have to kind of rely on our soft power and our approachability. And I remember when I came to Spain, you'd ask somebody for something and they'd just say no, sorry, bye. And you were like, you can't do that. You have to sort of say, like, suggest another avenue. You can't just kind of shut it down. That's a sort of, that's another kind of a trick as well, which is to say that, you always lead to something. And I'll tell you a thing that happens to me a lot, which is to say, helping somebody, like, so you might ask me something about podcasting software or something, and I might, it's easy for me to go like, sorry, no, goodbye. But if I take the time to work it out, like, it's funny how the same things repeat themselves. So you make an error, like, I just take this 10 minutes required to just look at, StreamYard and wherever the podcasting people are. And then it's funny how I get asked a question in class by a student about podcasting, and I'm able to sort of answer the question straight away. And then they think, I'm cool and up to date and relevant and all of those things. So I find that things that people ask you tend to repeat. And it turns out that if you don't know the answer, even if it's very often, take a note of it and go and kind of just get a couple of quick things, because almost certainly you're going to get that question again, and then you can be ready for it. So that's a sort of a thing that I tend to do. I tend to never, whenever anyone asks me something I don't know, I go find out the answer, even though it might be too late for that person, because you're going to get the question again.
Mm-hmm. I have to go to Ireland again. I was there and I liked it a lot. I was there when I was like 17, going up the Shannon with a houseboat. But
Yeah. Oh, wow.
and you stop in these little villages, you know,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. I've
everybody
done it
was
myself.
talkative. It was really beautiful. So
Yeah.
it just reminded me that why I liked it again. Um, when you another, like a really practical question now, when you buy into this notion of building a good relationship with your clients, what do you have to change in terms of organization? Like I specifically think about, for example, someone like a key account or customer success manager, but some companies that are scale ups, maybe only 10, 15 people, you have to think where to invest. What is your take on that?
Well, here's the thing, uh, and it's happening a lot more with SaaS companies and things that, relationships don't have to like, this idea of like sending reports and stuff like that. Very often what you need to do is connect it from the beginning so both of you can see the information. And that's contact, like I often, it's funny, like when we reconnected, like I didn't have to ask you, what have you been doing? Because I knew already, because I could see from your LinkedIn, I could see from your Instagram, I could see from, what you've been doing. So like, we didn't have to be like, in order to have our, to resume our relationship, you didn't have to tell me everything you've been doing, even though we hadn't spoken. So, that's a kind of the thing, that you can have contact without having contact. That's kind of what's changed. So you're sort of setting up the relationship whereby you only have to have like direct contact in the case of some sort of exception or something like that. So like their relationship is very much set up in terms of like, I see what you see, or something like that. And then of course, meetings are much more efficient, and but relationships are built on compounding, and you can, when you have kind of a relationship built up whereby somebody can see the information over a period of time, like that again is extremely kind of useful. Whereas very often the problem with data is it's just like one point in time. So, you then are agreeing whether that, and of course single point data is only useful in terms of comparison. If somebody says something is 6, that's only important if it was previously 4 or it was previously 8, like a single data point is very often not useful. So I think that's the sort of relationship you want to have. I mean, in the case of my investors, for instance, I'm invested in lots of companies as an angel, and I always tell them that, which is to say, we create a dashboard for investors where they can see in real time the numbers of the company. And then, there isn't this big thing about coming up to the next board meeting to know what's going on, because they know exactly what's going on. So there isn't this kind of big awkward reveal whereby you have to sort of say like, and here's our data and it's not good, or something like that. So we say, look, okay, we create a dashboard and there's, loads of wonderful software that does that. And you say, okay, you guys, you log in and you see what I see. And then, the relationship with the investors, we don't really have to talk as much about the numbers then, because we both have, know what they are, and we can look at other issues, whether it's hiring or something like that. So that's the idea of the relationship, whereby you're in contact, without being in contact.
So what I take from that is basically, you should have a common set of KPIs that you judge your cooperation or your work relationship. That should be accessible, and I buy into that. And it should be understandable for both parties. So without explanation, it's clear, okay, this is what it means. So we know it's good or bad or whatever. And then you can directly jump into a deeper conversation. What I also meant is, like, thinking from a founder's perspective or a CEO's perspective, you cannot do everything yourself. I mean, you can maybe have a relationship with your first 10 clients or so, but at some point you have too many clients, even in a B2B setting, that you have to build the machine to maintain this relationship and not be the machine, if you understand what I mean, because you cannot scale yourself. And how do you do that best? And when do you basically pull the trigger and say, I want to invest maybe also into manpower, so that I have someone or some people responsible for maintaining and building this relationship also on a personal level?
Yeah, I mean, the big thing there, certainly in the sense of entrepreneurship, is this notion of experts and generalists that we often get into this thing about why scale. So I have like companies who say, well, if it gets beyond a certain number, I'm not in control, and they talk of it like it's a bad thing. And like the best day in your life is the day that you hire an expert, like as a founder. And then that's, you're literally like, I often tell people like that should be like day one is company. Day two is like when somebody who's just really good at their job will come and work for you. I mean, that's when you've made it. It isn't so much about founding rounds or, reaching like 10 million in sales or whatever your target was. It's when like an expert, and experts are completely wonderful. They see things before they happen. They know what to do. They can call in resources. I mean, I one of my companies, because we had an expert on board, he just knew exactly who to call, and that person had contacts at a high level to fix the thing, with another call. So, that's very much what you're trying to do, is you're trying to have experts on board. And then it's funny how, problems just sort of stop occurring, because they can identify them almost before they happen. So, it's all about, asking yourself, who is the best person in this area, and how can I get them? And what kind of a company do I need to build? What kind of an image do I need to send? What kind of a thing do I need to do so that that person will work for me? And that's also attractive for investors. Investors will often ask, like, what are your kind of differentiation factors? And you could say something like, for SEMs for hotels, there are like 10 people in the world who really know about this stuff, and one of them works for us, and that's an example of something that investors find very good. So, that's the point, and that you need to be looking to have in your company. And most, like, like a lot of this the Barack Obama doctrine of, like, if the problems you have to think about, the decisions you make, are really important, you should be thinking about less decisions. So if you are the CEO of a company and the decisions you make are really important in terms of getting into certain areas and out of others, or launching in certain markets or something, like, you really shouldn't have a lot of decisions that you're making. You shouldn't be dealing with like transactional kind of stuff. And then there's also this kind of thing about that culture is what happens when the founder isn't there. And if you have a good and healthy culture, the founder doesn't really need to be there. So, those are all of the things that we see all the time, among scale-up companies, that they literally, they work without the founder being present, and it allows the founder. And then the founder there are certain things that only a founder can resolve, that only a founder has the credibility to kind of say, look, I didn't deliver food in my own car for the first 6 months of this company, only to see you do X or something like that. And founders have a kind of a credibility factor, which is why most investors try and keep them around, even if they might bring in a different CEO, that they try and keep the founders around, because founders have a credibility factor, and also just a history. They may know that we have previously had contact with somebody, or some existing relationship or something like that. So, like, all of those things are kind of the package. So that you want to try and hire experts, and then connect the experts with your customers, and let the relationship kind of go there. And then you're available if to kind of come in if there's an issue or something like that. But in general, everything should take place. Like, the best run companies are not the companies where everything has to be run at 100% to work. In fact, the best run companies are almost the companies that you do nothing and they're still successful. It's a sort of, like, I often talk again about Twitter, that doesn't seem to have anyone running it, hasn't really changed but it's still a profitable company. So this is, what do you have to try and do to set up so that, all of those things work? I mean, that's the more interesting question.
And I had a really nice conversation with a podcast guest called Greg Alexander. He built a consulting company in the United States with 30 employees, 30 million revenue, 50 million EBITDA, and sold it for 160 million. and he's basically said like the main reason why most professional service companies, or also maybe startup or scale-up companies, don't scale is because of the hero syndrome of the founder or CEO. They think they have to be the rainmakers, and if you have that thinking in place, well, you cannot scale yourself unlimitedly. There's a limit to what you can do, and once you get rid of this hero syndrome, you basically start to build a machine that runs without you, and that is beautiful if you think about what you can do then, because then you can, as you said, you can basically take important decisions, you can make strategic decisions, you can think about corporations that you haven't had time to do before. All these things that you can do that you are basically there for, you can start doing. And you said I shouldn't talk about it, but one thing I want to mention in our interview, and that's something that I really buy into, and that's why I have to mention it now, is that somehow after a certain size, it's easier to run a company. Because of exactly that. And you named, I think it was 250 employees, but can you expand a little bit on that?
Yeah, it sort of depends on your sector. And like there's this thing called the Dunbar number, which is like, you know, the Dunbar number, which is the number of kind of friends that you have, beyond which that you have so many, it's not possible to say you have that number of friends. And I think that's like 142 or something like that. So there is this part at which if a company is a certain size, people feel they have access to the CEO or the founder. And then there's companies that go beyond a certain size where it's not kind of, you know, I mean, I know it's a big shock for founders often when there are people working for them that they don't know. Like it's often, you know, I've heard founders tell me that they walk in and even like it's a whole other thing to know that not only do they not know the person, but the person doesn't know them. You know, that's a real kind of, you know, a shock. And so this is the sort of the thing that you go that it's much easier to run like a 500 person company. Say, I mean, it's going to have somebody listening who's going to like, you know, want to do kind of, you know, second order differentials on any number that I speak about. But, you know, the big thing is like getting away from this notion that the CEO is accessible and can be involved. And also the big thing, of course, is the vulnerability to shocks that, because, you know, like, here's the big thing now. I mean, one of the reasons I speak to so many German people, not just you, but other people, is part of the Mittelstand, you know, which is, I think, is an extraordinarily interesting, and I don't know why more countries don't copy it. I don't know why. I know every time I talk to somebody from Germany about this, they all start kind of like complaining and, oh, it's not what it used to be and all this kind of like stuff. But I'm like, you know, there's a huge problem in Spain, in Ireland, and other countries whereby SMEs are just stay small, you know. Now, some people say that's because of regulations. France has this thing called the Blue Book that beyond a certain number of employees, you have certain regulations, and they don't get involved in that. But you know, the classic, I mean, this thing idea is that you have like, imagine, put these three things together. So you know, you can have an 800 person company that you own like 95% of, that you have like a 90% market share in the world, you know, and you can still live in like, you know, a nice kind of village and, you know, drive between your nice house. And like, I mean, what could be better, you know, in life than that, you know? Rather than like so many of the other things that you see, whether it's living in a city and dealing with traffic, or, you know, having to all the time deal with like financing and bankers and, you know, turf wars between the various people. And also, so, you know, I'm all the time talking to more companies about the need to do that, which is to say, like, to really target. But the problem is that your brain tells you that survival is not about specialization. Your brain tells you that, you know, that putting your eggs in one basket puts you at risk. So we all try and kind of, you know, keep a wide range of products and keep a wide range of services rather than specializing in what we do. But it turns out that if you specialize, I mean, a lot of these companies that they have like the screw at the bottom of the microphone, or something like really obscure
We've
like
never
that.
heard of, but they make $1 billion revenue.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, then they have people working for them for a long time. They invest in R&D. They don't need to be like, a lot of the things about the head wrecking things about business are conflict related stuff. And if you're in a sector whereby you are clearly ahead of people, it's much more working like, how can we be wonderful together, rather than like trying to compete on price with somebody like that, or trying, all those that's what's hard about business. And I like too many movies and books about business romanticize the hustle, and I meet a lot of people from Mittelstand companies, and and that's sort of it, that they have somebody, they've like customers who set them a challenge, like, could you make this 2 centimeters smaller and 4 grams lighter, and then like that's what's really exciting. I mean, the famous story I have is about the distilling company. So if a good friend of mine who I went to school with has you knew I'd get onto whiskey. So he has like a whiskey company in Helsinki. And my friend Seamus, he didn't really, didn't really have any background in this. He sort of like said, I'm Irish, I must be able to make whiskey. So the equipment for a lot of the distillers, those big distillery things that you see for make whiskey, like comes from one of these German Mittelstand companies, So, and then the Seamus rang him up one day to sort of said like, sorry, I've broken your machine, And he sort of thought like, oh, the guy is going to sort of like, how could you do that and whatever. And the guy was like, wow, brilliant, tell me more. And the guy was like really excited that somebody had found a way that he could make his machine better. So Seamus was like, well, when you connect the two things, the rubber band in the middle, he said that we broke that. And the guy was like, and I'm not going to do the German accent, okay, much as but maybe I will. But he was like, that is not possible. It's not possible, Maybe it's a French accent, but anyway, maybe an Alsace accent. So he was like, it's not possible to break my rubber band. And he sort of said, I'm coming. I'll see you tomorrow. Like, and he like flew up to Finland, and he was like, and Seamus was like, oh, would you like to go to the hotel first? And he was like, take me to my machine, and he was like looking at like he was just absolutely fascinated. And then in the end, he said, you need help. So then he got his daughter, who I think was like 18 or 19 or something, to go up and kind of, stay in Helsinki for like, I think she was there for about 2 months. I mean, he was sort of looking for an experience for her and that kind of thing. So she was there and she came in every day and she really helped them to kind of do all the distilling and stuff like that. So, that's a sort of an example of a total win-win story. So like, he was and also the fundamental entrepreneur thing about making a positive out of a negative. But, that's kind of, those stories when two people can work together. So Seamus was able to help him to make his machine even better in the next iteration, which he probably, because he would never have known it himself, right? Because he wouldn't have known how to break it because he saw it in a certain way. And then, he was able, also just the way he was able to help and stuff like that. So, but he has a level of expertise in those machines that really nobody else has, because of that, he's literally the go-to person. So I think that's a lot of Spanish companies that they need to sort of like, double down on a specific thing, I mean, a specific machine, a specific technology. And then like Amazon and these people are never going to compete because there isn't enough volume. So too many people get into areas to compete where potentially Amazon can come in and compete against you. But, they are never going to, they're just not interested in areas that aren't high volume.
That are not a billion heavy or more market, yeah.
So that's kind of, so those are sort of a classic interesting, and that of course is a B2B transaction, right? In the sense of he's making the machine and James is making the distillery. So, that's what more Spanish companies need to do, which is to sort of, simplify. Simplicity scales, complexity kills. And what they need to do is simplify their business to try and get to 500 people or something like that. And then, first of all, you're not vulnerable. So if you're 150 people, losing some accounts or something can actually be a problem for you. But if you're 500, you generally have the resources to kind of to get through it. And then of course, if you're 500, you don't come into the office. It's not a big deal, and people don't feel the expectation to get to you and things like that. But it is a real problem with people who are starters. And at the beginning of this conversation, we talked about the kind of people who set up companies. So, they can often be hard for them to let go. But that's really what it is. You can't bring in an expert and tell them what to do. You have to have, you hire an expert to let them alone to do the job. And then you let the founder kind of go on. But the other thing just finally is that experts are attracted by difficult challenges. So, bringing in an expert means that, they will push you to do hard things. Like if I want to get hire a really good coder or something, what attracts them is a difficult challenge. Good people are attracted by difficult challenges. Mediocre people are attracted by, low risk challenges. So that's when you know you have a good person. Yeah, absolutely.
What we also see with our clients, so we help B2B companies win new clients through digital channels. And what we see, most companies, and they're not smaller, so they're beyond the 10 people size, they're like between 20 and 200-300 employees. They still think they can serve everybody. And what we noticed is once you define, and that's maybe where you have to start, define your ideal customer that you want to help. Then maybe once you have that ideal customer, you think about how can we help this one ideal customer get better at whatever they do or help them solve their problem. And then your whole product becomes niche. And it's exactly like you said, what happened to my small company. Once we decided on focusing on B2B, especially professional services or SaaS companies that have a very specific product, suddenly clients come to us, or potential clients say, hey, I saw that you're an expert in this field. I see many companies doing something similar, but you're the only one doing that for example, consultancies. So that's like a magic wand that but you have to be really strict, because it feels like, I can tell you really, because it felt like you give away a big chunk of a potential market, but in the end, you're not giving away anything. You're opening up one really good market for you.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, I before the pandemic, I used to spend about 20 weeks a year traveling, going to conferences and stuff like that. And, I often think about what people say to you after the speeches, and, people say things like, oh, I wish I'd met you 10 years ago or something like that. But, one a thing I end up saying to people sometimes is like, what I have to tell you about scaling companies will probably take me about 5 minutes. But it will take you a year to believe what I'm telling you is what you need to do, and like, that's it. When you sort of say like, I mean, the only thing, it's funny now, or maybe it's not funny, but, the pandemic has been really useful in terms of understanding scaling. And there's two parts to that. The first part is everyone now understands exponentiality, right? In a way that they didn't before. The idea that, your growth of 50 days, you can get the same growth in day 51 as you did in the previous 50 days. Like it's not 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. It's 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64. So people are sort of understanding, that literally you can do a day's damage in one day, and people, didn't really understand that. So people are understanding that your job as in scaling, like I always say, like growing is linear, scaling is exponential. And that's why these SaaS companies are incredibly powerful, because they have exponentiality built into their business model from the beginning. And that companies don't have products or services, they have business models. And that sounds very kind of business school professor, but it's true. But that SaaS isn't a product or a service, it's a business model. So you're kind of designed from the beginning all of the things that you need to have. So this is the first thing about like linear growth is linear. Um, and exponentiality is connected with scaling. So what you're trying to do is set up to scale. And the other thing is just doubling down on what works. And with the vaccines, you know, people are now understanding like this is how this works, that you experiment, you do hundreds and hundreds of experiments, and then you find one thing that works, and then you scale that. And like, you know, it's been a useful metaphor for me to talk about, like, you know, all the different companies, you know, BioNTech or I can't even, whatever, I get the name wrong sometimes, or Moderna, whatever. Like, they didn't scale up the stuff that didn't work. They scaled up the stuff that works. So I'm looking at a founder and saying like, because they have difficulty leaving the work behind, you know, and I'm like, no, you experiment to find out the thing that works the best. And then you stop doing the other stuff and you scale up the vaccine that works. And then that's kind of what companies should be doing as well, which is to say that they experiment and then they find out the thing that works, the thing that, as we said, delights the customer that they can't live without. And that's what you scale. And the idea that you would like scale the other things or invest any marketing and sales behind the things that work less well, which is, I'm sure they're vaccine candidates, some of them worked a little, you know, but then they got one that had efficacy of. So that's, you know, those things have been kind of useful in terms of having people understanding scaling a small bit more. But like that thing about doubling down, I think in my first 4 companies, I didn't really understand that, or at least I didn't have it clear. And then it was that moment when I sort of understand it. But, you know, our brains, I often talk about going to your wardrobe. And if I said to you, like, any clothes you haven't worn in the last 2 years, statistically, you're never going to wear them again. So, you know, give them away. You will look at me and say, well, I don't know, like maybe, you know, like that yellow pants or something. Like it's a sort of like, so, and that's why people don't like having choice taken away from them. I mean, that's the thing about winning elections and stuff like that. It's like what people don't like most of all is something that they had being taken away from them. And that's why, you know, politicians sort of like say that whatever is happening is taking something that you have now away from you. And that seems to like sadly resonate in the short term. So that's absolutely important, that you double down on what works. And that then allows you to scale. And then you get to a point where literally you can't be attacked, you know, because you have such a lead in expertise in what's going on. And obviously the best form of attacking is that people don't attack you in the first place, you know. That's it's, I think that there's whatever that guy Sun Tzu, you know, and these rules, it was like the first thing is that no battle takes place, you know. It's like in sailing, rule 1 is no collision, you know, and rule 2, Sun Tzu is the best, you know, the battles you win, the best battle. Oh my God, maybe I should have looked this up beforehand, but he says something like, you know, that the battles you win are the battles you don't have to fight. And that is very much true in scaling companies, that you scale in such a way that people, you know, decide not to take you on.
That's something that I think you really have to test out and feel your way into when you're an entrepreneur, because it's logically understandable, I think, but it feels always differently when you're in the middle of the situation. And then it's good to have someone maybe also from the outside who points you into the right direction. Joe, unfortunately, we're already at the end of our time. Okay. And I want to conclude, if you still have these 2-3 minutes, with our 5 rapid fire questions.
Okay, well, I'm hardly going to go anywhere now, am I? Anyway, fire away. I love questions.
Awesome. What do you do to keep body and mind fit and sharp?
I love my wife and my children, which is sort of like, that sounds really corny, and I probably would never have said that, but you know, like, it's funny how your mood of the day, you know, so we do all that boring Southern European hugging in the morning, and my, you know, my wife, who will never listen to this, a very different profile to me, you know, she sort of like, demands that, that we, and it's funny how physical contact and stuff, so many, how just even going to the door and waving and all that, I never really valued just the way that makes you feel good, and then you go from there to like beginning a day and stuff like that. And like, listen, I, as an entrepreneur, sometimes I'm focused on my work, and I don't due to my children's music recitals or whatever like that. But I do think there's a lot to be said for investing in personal relationships, and you hear all these stories about people at the end of their lives and things they regret and things they don't regret. But I definitely think that to feel, God, this is extremely corny, but like to feel loved and to give love, is something that I didn't value really for a lot of my life. I just thought it was like, but I think that it's really important that any time invested in that, I think is time you get back. In terms of the other stuff, I do, as I say, I usually swim. I swim 1,000 meters twice a week, and then I run 5Ks. And that's kind of what I try to do in terms of body and mind. But then, of course, I drink too much and, all that kind of stuff. But like, I don't know. I mean, I never, like, this is a really good question. And the MBA has changed a lot from when you did it. When you did the MBA, it was very much still focused on like learning models, 2x2
11
matrices.
years ago now. 11
yeah,
years
yeah,
ago.
yeah. In some ways, you were kind of, the kind of things that you and I used to talk about is much more mainstream now. That everyone is talking about, help me make good decisions in life. Much less so than, like, it's really uncool to sort of like, to be nakedly aggressive about getting a good job, because a lot of people have started to understand that
things have changed then, because I remember in my class there were a lot of people really keen on getting this really cool whatever job they wanted.
Yeah, no, that was there's less of that now. I mean, of course, people want a job and stuff like that, but there's much more sense at which they want a job that reflects their personality and the type of people they are. So listen, there are some people that are right for McKinsey, right, and or Goldman Sachs or whatever, and that's fine, and they should go there. But I am completely unsuited for McKinsey and completely unsuited for Goldman Sachs. So I shouldn't go there. And that's kind of perhaps what the difference is. It's helped me make good decisions. And that kind of thing has changed. But I do think it's really important to, to invest in, and also just to raise good kids and stuff like that. And again, I find investment comes back to you, that, it's funny, like, if I'm like, especially like creative things, that, this idea that if I have to like write an article or something like that, that isn't just like executional and transactional, that if you just generally feel good about yourself, you feel as if you're loved, you feel as if, you're doing something you like, and all of those things, like that work is really easy to do. And if all the time you have to force yourself to do it, that's a whole kind of other thing. So very long answer, and probably not what you were expecting, and everyone probably says it, but I think it's that having sort of equilibrium in that respect, and investing in your relationships. Now, I should ring my sisters more, I should ring my mother more, all of that other stuff. But I just think investing in your relationships, I have very little tolerance for people who just go like, who don't value that.
What's your favorite business book?
Oh my God. Well, of course, I don't have any books. It's a little joke. Oh yeah, well, I guess in podcast you won't really understand that joke. What is my favorite business book? Well, they change a lot. I mean, it sort of depends on.
Right now.
What am I reading? Well, let's kind of look and see what's going on. And
for the ones listening, Joe is right now looking at like his mini library behind himself.
Yeah, which is quite amazing. Let me just pull up. This is quite good. This is like all about, I think books on creativity and sales are always interesting. which are, but I think you get a lot of stuff from fiction as well. You know, I think it's a sort of an odd thing. I mean, I would go, I'll say one thing, Sammy, which is to say, just read anything by women, you know, like read books by women and like, because, and listen to music by women, you know. I mean, there's a book, Zadie Smith, White Teach, just all about, the immigrant experience and stuff like that. That's just incredibly good about just, how an immigrant fits in society. And then, of course, you have The Female Eunuch by Germaine Greer, which is like, and this is totally, it's amazing that by the year that what's happening is that there will be more female millionaires by the year 2030, which is in 10 years time. That's what people are predicting, because, and I was surprised to read this. And you're already saying, I think in China, they already say there's certainly a cluster of very wealthy women, but I tend to value a lot things that are written by women. And if you think, like, could you name any business books written by women? Like, it's hard enough to find them. If I was to, like, the Clayton Christensens and the Michael Porters and all that kind of stuff, I think those. So that would be my recommendations. I found the Female Eunuch by Germaine Greer was just interesting again, because just there was so many things in terms of my relationships and working with women that I thought I was doing the right thing. And that book just clearly explains that actually you were doing the wrong thing, just, and words, you were saying that you wanted to be supportive and helpful. In some cases, you were actually not being supportive and helpful. And I remember reading, nothing has ever made me just go, oh my God. And just like, you were having the opposite effect of what you were trying to achieve. And how women feel in certain circumstances has been incredibly useful to me, just in terms of both the female students I teach, also the people I work with, and those kind of factors. So, I mean, there is a sense at which this is the right thing to do, but it's also a sense in which there's a huge economic opportunity. You can learn a lot from books written by women, and understanding, how to interact with them in a way that they feel comfortable. That can be of enormous benefit. Actually, if you look behind a lot of the scaling companies, the tech scaling companies, an awful lot of them, whether it's Instagram or Airbnb or Facebook or Intercom or like, they all had a women COO. Chief of Operation Officer was a woman. Now, that may be unrelated, because, like, there's sort of like, two possibilities, but it's quite interesting that there does seem to be this kind of, intuition that women have for operations, that they can kind of perhaps detect and sense things, or, bring two parties together that are fighting, or those kind of stuff. So that would be in terms.
That may be a good course of like do a study on that. Huh? So look at the last, I don't know, 100, 200, 300 successful companies, or also not successful companies, and look only on the female CEOs and see if there's a pattern and higher success rate. It would be super interesting. I'm a strong believer in women in business, and we are happy to hire many women because they bring in a totally different attitude than usually the straightforward, little bit testosterone-driven way of deciding things. So I'm absolutely with you. So now the next question.
And of course, Angela Merkel, right? The most successful politician in 20 years. In 20 years. So anyway, I just said that just to see your face, but like, every country in the world says we wish we had a Merkel, so that's, let's see who follows, that's true. Let's see who follows. Yes. Next question.
Your favorite business leader you follow?
Oh yeah, like I find that, like I've worked for like indirectly for a couple of billionaires, and like what you see behind the scene, you know, whenever I read a book about a billionaire, I always think like that the reality is probably never like that. So and I don't think Richard Branson, I don't think like those, a lot of people, he's a lot very misunderstood. You know, people often think that he, you know, a lot of business, you know, he gets a lot of money from the government. It's the same as Elon Musk, you know, who gets all his money from the government. So someone who's getting unemployment benefit is seen as a sponger, and someone who's getting all their money from like the US government is seen as a super entrepreneur. And Branson is kind of similar. So um the business leaders, I mean, it has to be people that I know, that are the people that I respect and follow. I think that you know, because then you really know, I mean, you know, rather than saying somebody is wonderful that you don't really know. I mean, how can you possibly
Who would be one
do
person?
that? Okay, I need to look at my I need to look at my bookshelf again. And uh like like if you think about, I mean, like Mark Zuckerberg is a horrible guy who's brought, you know, dreadful things. You know, like if you start to, I'm really struggling to find, I mean, find me someone who's done something that had real integrity. You know, you are kind of struggling to find. Everyone kind of, I guess, talks about the head of Patagonia, or these, you know, these kind of people who created sustainable companies. um you know, I there is a guy, um in Ireland called Jerry Kennelly, who, um, and he told me about this guy called John O'Shea, who did a lot of stuff in, and he said to me, you know, Jerry always says to me, you know, people often, you know, Jerry has made a lot of money and he has an airplane and, you know, huge house and all that stuff. And people say, I'm wonderful. But he talked about this guy, John O'Shea, who got involved in famine relief in Africa. And he said to me, he said, there are people, he said, there are thousands and thousands of people who are alive because of what this guy did, you know. And you like, it was a real amazing way of talking about people who matter in the world. And this guy is like, would drive you absolutely crazy. He has nervous energy, you know, these kind of things. But you know, the things that he has done, you know, he has gone into like the trouble spots in the world and tried to, you know, you look at someone like that and then you compare him to like, by lionizing Elon Musk or Steve Jobs, and I find that to be you know, sort of very distasteful. Like all they have is money, you know. So I think that people who have made a difference, I'm not going to say like Mother Teresa or Nelson Mandela and stuff, that's too cliched, but you know. And then you also have, of course, the medical stuff, like the guy who invented you know, the insulin and then gave it away for free. You know, those kind of people and role models and heroes are much people who just did difficult things in difficult circumstances. You know, those are amazing people that we should lionize, and much less the kind of the business stuff, because you know, what's behind the scenes generally, you know, isn't that good. So yeah, so people who have, you know, tried to, you know, those kind of heroes and NGOs that just do really difficult things. And John is like, I mean, it's amazing how this guy John O'Shea, it's quite amazing how like how you know, people say about not seeing race or not being judgmental or stuff like that, and I didn't really understand that until I met John. I mean, he's utterly committed to humanity, as being, you know, your father was Tunisian, I think, or you know, whatever, like these kind of, like, he doesn't see like he just sees people, you know. And some of that is kind of like, he doesn't, and it really made, because of course there's no test for race. Like you can't, you know, you can't do any scientific test to find out whether someone is black or white or whatever. And spending time with him really influenced me in terms of, you know, oh, so many problems in this world come from racism and discrimination, and you know, asking, you know, questions of myself as to whether I judge people based on, where they're from. I mean, most of it is, I'm always interested in where you're from, because that helps me understand what drives you, which then I think is a good thing in terms of building a connection. That's always been the way I thought of it. But it was sort of, this is the first guy I really felt that he utterly is as committed to the life of somebody in Africa that he has never met as somebody else. And I thought that, that kind of thing is it's just amazing. And then I hear someone saying,
can you send me the link to, if he has an organization, can you send me the link and we put it into the show notes?
Perfect. Yeah, his organization is called GOAL, GOAL, and he does a lot of using sports people to raise money. So,
love
but
it.
yeah, no, interesting. But yeah, just an amazing guy to think, like, if you want, like, this is what Jerry told me, that because of John, he said, like, hundreds of thousands of people are alive because he stopped, like, famines and warlords and, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's big.
Yeah.
Next question. Who should be our next podcast guest and why?
I think what's really interesting is people who have pivoted from working for like McKinsey or Goldman Sachs or these people to entrepreneurs. I mean, I'm not quite in the saving souls business, but I am very much in the, I have a lot of people that go to my class and I can think of their names and they're very dedicated in that. And I was often saying, you're not suited for that. So, while you might get the job, so I think it's always interesting to people who.
Do you have one person in mind?
I do, yeah. But I don't necessarily want to say them because this guy is is a difficult person. But I have somebody that I in fact I can give you 3 or 4 people.
That would be nice.
And they are. What's really interesting is to talk to them about the journey from working in management consulting. And I was teasing them saying, this, you should start a business, and they were like, whatever, they had fighting against it. And then when I see their update on LinkedIn, I then go, like, I often send them a message to say I was right,
I knew it.
And they often go to me to say, yeah, you were, and it's a happy thing because of course they found the strength to do that. But a lot of in terms of making an impact, like the world used to be in such a way that to really make an impact, you had to be very close to the centers of influence. So that involved working for like the McKinseys of the world and these kind of thing. But I don't think that's as true anymore. I think access to information is much more open and available now. So I think it's possible to make an impact in the world as being an entrepreneur. There's an amazing thing on the Ryanair site, which is called wedding invitations. And there's like, pages and pages and pages and pages of, dear Ryanair, I was on Erasmus and I met this girl from Spain and I was in Sweden, and because of your cheap flights, we were able to keep our relationship alive, and we're now getting married, and here's an invite to the wedding, or something like that. And there's just pages of people just saying what Ryanair has done, and I guess you could say EasyJet and add low cost in general, has really benefited their lives, because previously things were so expensive. And that's the thing about business that we forget, that as well as making vaccines, like, I really fight this image of conservative business as old men in gray suits. I think business can be, a really exciting and interesting thing, and also can be really beneficial in terms of, there are lots of businesses that have created things that are wonderful, and business people a lot of the times don't talk enough about this, and then people like don't want to get into business because they just think it's all like bankers, evicting people and this kind of stuff.
For me, what helped a lot was, in fact, my time at IE Business School. especially the class with Enrique Dance, where he just, like, the only thing he did basically for 10 or 12 classes was, for one class, he always invited one entrepreneur who talked about his journey. And we could ask questions. And that just made it real and also showed that how life is really as an entrepreneur. So if more schools would do that, I think more people would consider it. Yeah. Last question, Joe.
But before you do the last question, my elective now in the IMBA is all guest speakers. You know, I just don't, because the problem like that, and that's what you say, because exactly what you say, it's personal, it's authentic, it allows you to ask questions relevant. Where if you're studying a case, it makes things seem like A, then B, then C, and the world isn't really like that. So, you know, I ask guest speakers, and I you know, that's the value that I try to bring to people. So Enrique was a sort of a pioneer in that respect, but that's what I do now. I try and bring people into their lives. And when you hear, I always say this, like when you hear like 15 people saying the same thing, that will convince you more than if you just hear me saying it 15 times. That has more weight.
Absolutely buy into that. Last question, short answer, please. You can directly address our audience and ask for anything they can help you with.
Oh, come to IE Business School. You know, that's a total win, you know. You know, my program is called the Owners Scaleup Program, which is a program specifically designed for people who are about to hit product market fit or just after product market fit, and how to go on the scaling journey. And it's not a typical course in the sense that we keep the numbers small. So you're not talking about this kind of like big, huge class kind of a thing. And it enables other entrepreneurs to talk to entrepreneurs. And you learn more from the other entrepreneurs than you really do from the professors. The professors just kind of structure the debate and stuff like that. But in so many cases, just talking to someone who's been there before can really help you along the journey, can kind of, you know, if you're sort of, you think that's what you want to do, when you hear another entrepreneur say, this is what you should do, that really gives you that trigger to make you go forward. So there are lots of courses that we have with, you know, so come to IE Business School. And in particular, if you're an entrepreneur who has a business that is kind of wants to go, you know, from it's a 10 or 20 people and wants to kind of go to 150, 200, whatever like that. The Owners Scaleup Program is a really good course for you. And it's just final thing is that it's online and then 1 week in Madrid. So it doesn't kind of interfere too much in being a big commitment. And it can, you know, it can really help you put some order into the chaos and sort of understand what problems you should be working on and what stuff is noise.
Love it. Thanks a lot, Joe. It was really interesting talking to you again after such a long time. And yeah, I'm sure we're going to hear from each other again in the future.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure, Sammy, and I'm great to see you take the initiative to do this. You know, and it's funny how, you know, it's in giving back you learn a lot of things. So it's been a delight for me, and you know, best of luck with and I'll find you some guests as I promised.
Thanks a lot, Joe.